Hi, this is Lisa, and you are listening to I Love That Movie. This podcast is for movie lovers. It's not an unbiased opinion, it's not a straightforward review, it's just a couple people talking about a movie that they love. The format is each week I have a guest, and that guest and I discuss a movie that they love, something they're obsessed with, something they connect with. We'll talk about the plot, the director, and the actors, but we'll also talk about the personal connection my guest has with that movie. So if that sounds like something you want to listen to, keep listening. Hey, this is Lisa, and as always, you can catch me on X or Twitter at ILTM Podcast, all one word. I'm also on Instagram. I Love That Movie Podcast is my name on there. And we've got a Patreon. So this show is free. It'll always be free, I hope. But if you do want to support the show, you can. That's at patreon.com/I Love That Movie. And if you like what you hear today, please subscribe and rate the show. It does help new listeners find us. And forgot to mention, if you support the Patreon, you do get a weekly bonus episode of just everything else that I'm watching that week. People ask me about new movies and other movies that we don't talk about here on the podcast. That's all on the Patreon. But I have a returning guest today. I have Thomas. Say hi, Thomas.
Hey, Lisa. I'm glad to be back.
Yes, welcome back. You've been on the show a few times,
Mhm.
and always a pleasure to have you on. If this is our listeners' first time hearing your voice, did you want to introduce yourself just a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. My name's Thomas Olsen, and I've been on your show a few times, and I've always had a blast. But I'm a big fan of movies of all kinds of variety. I love superhero movies, big blockbusters like Star Wars and all that stuff. Also love like everything in between that, though. But I think my like sweet spot is kind of like some of the movies we're going to talk about today, and like Christopher Nolan type stuff. Those are kind of
Yeah.
that kind of merge big ideas with like epic, set it across something very epic and like, or visually and like it can also be entertaining as well. But
Yeah.
I'm also a dad of 3 kids, and
Oh,
that takes up a big chunk of my time.
I'm
But so I don't
sure.
watch as many movies anymore. But I watch a lot of kid movies actually, but not as much adult stuff, I guess. But yeah, so it's a little bit about me.
Yeah, it can be challenging to find time. I don't have children, and yet I still don't see as many movies as I used to,
Yeah,
so I relate to you there. Well, if people haven't heard the show before, my guest always picks the movie. So I'll get a lot of requests where people say, "Will you cover this movie, that movie?" Actually, up to you. So, Thomas, what movie did you want to talk about today?
I picked the World War I film that came out in 2019, or yeah, end of 2019, 1917, by Sam Mendes, directed by Sam Mendes. So that's the one I picked.
Wow. Yeah. So when you said 2019, to me, it feels like this movie came out yesterday.
Yeah,
I didn't realize it had been a few years.
yeah,
Wow.
it'll be 5 years this year, which is nuts.
Wow.
Yeah.
That must be the pandemic kind of messing with my timeline. It feels like 2 years
Oh,
ago, but
it totally, yeah. It feels like it's weird because I feel like when the pandemic started, like that feels so long ago, but then also not so long ago. Like it's just time is
yeah.
so it's been totally screwed up. And it's funny because I feel like you and I aren't the only ones that say stuff like that. So
Yeah, I know. I think it's everybody, but so wow, 2019. Well, normally I ask when you first saw this movie, but I'm going to take a wild guess and say you saw it in theaters.
I did, yeah. So I saw it. I think it was limited release 2019, and then it came out wide, like because I think it came out like limited, like right around like the Star Wars Rise of Skywalker.
Ah,
It
okay.
came out. I remember seeing it. I think I probably saw it the weekend it came out, a wide release, and it was just like a Saturday afternoon. And I remember being like excited for it because it looked intriguing, and I enjoy Sam Mendes, like the director, but I wasn't like it wasn't on like my top list of like things to see. But yeah, I did see it in theaters, and yeah, I'm glad I did because this movie deserves to be seen on a big screen. So
Absolutely. I want to say that I might have seen it because I was on. um, Palmer and Tim's podcast, Academy Rewind, and I feel like I might have seen it because it was a lineup of, one of those films that got nominated for Best Picture, I
All
think,
right.
that
Yeah.
year. Um, but yeah, I mean, for those of you listening, if you're not familiar, Sam Mendes also directed, some really impressive movies such as, um, you know, Spectre, Skyfall. I think he directed American Beauty as well and a few others.
Starhead is another good
Yeah,
one.
Jarhead. Oh yeah,
And I
quite a
think
few films.
Skyfall to me is that and Casino Royale are my two favorite Bond movies.
I agree,
I think
100%.
Skyfall is like one of the most in-depth Bond films you're going to see. Like it takes a different approach, and so I mean, yeah, just kind of coming off that. And Spectre is okay, but Skyfall is
Yeah, Spectre's
phenomenal,
fine, but it's no Skyfall. You're
right?
right.
But I still think though, like that he's a great director, and so I was, yeah, and I remember that being part of the advertisement of like the
Mhm.
director of Skyfall, and so it was like, oh, okay, World War I, that looks interesting. So
Yeah, yeah, and normally around this time of the show, I'll kind of give you a couple quick facts, just to kind of set the scene. So we already talked about Sam Mendes, and editor Lee Smith. They stated that, despite the apparently continuous shot, broken only by one interval of unconsciousness, actually dozens of invisible edits were made that concealed transitions through black, moves behind objects, and so on. But according to Mendez, the shortest unbroken shot was 39 seconds long, while the longest single continuous shot was 8.5 minutes long. And I bet when I say 8.5 minutes, you're probably already thinking of what scene I'm thinking too, probably.
yeah,
Yeah. Also, Mendez says that his grandfather, Alfred, who entered the World War II as, or World War One, rather, sorry, World War One, 1917, not World War II.
yeah.
World War One as a 17-year-old in 1916 and carried messages through no man's land. He was 5'4" and was often hidden by the winter mist that reached as high as 6 feet. And 2 years into the muddy trenches left Alfred with a lifelong habit of washing his hands frequently, and he didn't like to talk about his wartime experiences until he was in his 70s.
That's I did not know. I mean, I knew that this was based off his Sam Mendes, some of his grandfather's experiences, but didn't know about some of those other things like that. He didn't talk about it until he was older, and I mean, makes sense. Who would want to talk about the absolute horrors of World War I, like
I
that,
know.
the trauma that I literally this movie captures it, and it's like I can't even imagine coming
Oh, I
home.
know.
Like it's like literally, it's like this movie's almost like a horror movie at times because of like
I
what.
agree. Yeah, that's a really good observation. I think, um, I mean, for his grandfather to have literally been in the trenches, and experiencing a lot of things that the characters of the movie does, it when you watch it, it almost does feel like a firsthand account. So it makes
Yeah,
sense that it was his grandfather that he had that
right.
deep connection.
Yeah, and I know like it in the movie it does kind of like there's like a at the end it says something about that, but I didn't know about like he's 5'4". Like that's cool. It's interesting.
It is because I think like the two main characters, yeah, I would say in the film are played by George McKay and I think the other guy's Richard. No, that's not right.
Oh, I
Who's
had
the other?
Dean
Yeah.
Charles, and I just had it pulled up,
Oh, thank you.
um, but I closed it, so I'm pulling up again. Um,
No worries.
uh, where did he go?
That's okay. I think it's, yeah, Dean Charles Chapman.
There we go. Yep.
Yeah, I feel like that character is a little bit smaller, than the
Yeah.
other main character. So maybe that's his grandfather stand-in.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, Lee Smith. I don't know if he's a big the editor. He is a big, or he was actually. He is that correct? I just realized like maybe it's getting the gender wrong, but big editor for yeah, it's a he, but for Christopher Nolan, like the Dark Knight trilogy, Interstellar.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, so
Makes
um,
sense, because isn't the cinematography Roger Deakins?
it is. Yep.
Yeah, yeah, you can definitely tell.
Yeah, which I mean, the cinematography is like, oh, it's phenomenal in this movie.
It's next level. I feel like honestly, okay, I think that the plot is really good. The acting is great, but I almost feel like the visuals are what put it over the edge for me.
Oh, totally.
You
It
know?
totally like brings you into the experience, like
Mhm.
where I mean, literally, like unlike anything I really, I mean, there's other movies for sure, but like but like ground level, like you are with these characters going through the experience, and that's one thing I think I like about the movie is that it is an experience. It's not just
Mhm.
like it's yeah, it's got the good. I think it has a great story, great characters, like all you said, but then it's just this like immersive experience that you go through. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, every year there's some sort of war film that comes out, right? And there's almost like this stigma around it of like, oh, another Oscar movie, another World War II movie. Lately, it's been more World War One,
mhm.
which
Yeah,
I think is good because I feel like sometimes in some ways World War II does get overexplored almost.
yeah,
So I like hearing more about World War One, but I also feel like this movie is set apart a little bit, like I said, by the visuals and other elements of the film, like the feeling of a continuous shot, even though it's not always the case, right? There's a lot
right,
of edits, but it feels like you're there. And I think that I remember when this came out, there were some people that around me that were like, "Oh, another one." Like, I don't like war films. And I always think like I get that, it's a very heavy topic, but at the same times, I think war film is a broad term. It's like saying I don't like horror. It's like, well, there's a lot of different genres in horror, so I think this is a unique film, and I think deserved the amount of buzz and praise that it got when it came out. I really, really enjoyed it. I mean, as much as you can enjoy something tragic, I really enjoyed it.
yeah, and I've had a few friends that have expressed they don't like war films, and I've every time I've brought and when this movie's come up, I've always been like, like I totally get that. This is not your typical war film,
Yeah.
because I mean, yes, there are battles and stuff like that, but it's not done in the same way. It's literally even in like the battle sequence, it's focused on our main character from his
Hmm.
perspective, which I think is unique. And to
Yeah.
me, it's almost like a survival movie. Like
Yeah.
it's like one person's survival. Like, are they going to survive this and get through this? And I think you can kind of go into it knowing. Sorry, are we in spoilers territory yet?
You know what? I forgot to say that at the top of the film. I haven't even said the what the movie's about. I just
Yeah.
realized
Sorry.
that
Yeah.
we got
Yeah.
too excited. Okay, so I'm going to say the
Yeah.
summary really quick,
Yeah. Yeah.
but we are going to talk spoilers. So if you haven't seen this movie yet, you should pause and go see it. But the gist of it is it's around April 6, 1917, and an infantry battalion assembles to wage a war deep in enemy territory. Two soldiers are assigned to race against time and deliver a message that stops 16 or 1,600 men from walking straight into a deadly trap. And in case you need a little bit more background, it takes place after the German retreat to the Hindenburg Line, and it's during Operation Alberic. So if you're a history buff, it takes place around that time. But essentially, your two main characters have to get a message to some troops before they walk right into a trap, essentially. And so it's a race against time. And one of the brothers, or one of the men, is even trying to get a message to his brother, who it would literally save his life. So that kind of adds to the stakes in the story as well. But as you said, Thomas, it's making a very big war very small and personal, and that is different from some war films that focus on either like the glory or the horror of the war as a whole, whereas this is like following a couple main characters in their story. I agree with that assessment that it's almost like a survival story. But go ahead, tell us your spoiler.
Yeah. So I was just gonna say, like, we know that you watch the movie and Schofield, the main character, like, I think you can assume that he's going to survive
Hmm.
just because I mean, he's the one person, but like the how of it, I think is like
Yeah.
incredible to watch. And it really just puts you on the edge of your seat. And I've seen this, it's not a movie that I necessarily like put on like a lot because it's a pretty heavy movie, but it's one that like at least every other year I probably watched it since it came out.
Yeah.
And every time I'm still like the intensity and the like I'm on the edge of my seat when watching it because I think it does such a great job of capturing like the tension of it and yeah, anyway, so
No, I agree, and I think the older I get, the more I appreciate, like, I think new young talent that they find, like,
Mhm.
I had never seen these actors before, and they look so young. I mean, because he's portraying a 17-year-old, but you're just kind of like, man, these are big shoes to film. Like this is
Yeah,
a film directed by Sam Mendes. It's a war epic, and the main characters do such a great job of like kind of portraying, I guess, like the innocence, but also like, I think what the war kind of does to them, and how I don't know, it felt very real, and
yeah.
was and I like personal stories, so I think I kind of gravitate towards things like this where it's told from their perspective.
Yeah, and I think the cast is so phenomenal because, like you
Mhm.
said, our two main leads are people that I was not familiar with. Um, and I'd heard I was reading that originally Tom Holland was kind of up for the role of Schofield, and
I
I
could
love
see Tom Holland as
yeah,
Schofield.
and I love Tom Holland. I think he would have been great. But I actually appreciate that it was someone that I didn't know
Yeah.
because I think it like you said, it did feel like this really kind of like really, and Tom Holland is young too, and he probably would look young, but like it just I don't know, there is an innocence, and it's like you realize like wow, like these people, these were kids, like
Yeah.
these were
It's
like
heartbreaking.
teenagers, and they were thrown into like this impossible situation, and it makes me like I'm sorry, I'm getting like emotional thinking about it because it's like
Yeah.
my kids are really young, but like if my son or daughter, when they're like 16, 17, 18, and there's like a world war going on, and like the idea of sending them away at that age, like they don't know
Yeah.
how the world works and like how brutal it is. And to go into one of the most, to start your adult life from that spot, like, I mean, and this movie really captures that like loss of innocence, I think.
Yeah.
And the actors do phenomenal. And I love how it's sprinkled though with like really well known British actors. We get like
Yeah.
Strong and Benedict Cumberbatch and Colin Firth and Richard Madden at the end, who's like he's in it for like 2 minutes, and he's like, oh, he makes me cry every time that scene. Um,
Yeah.
it's yeah, the cast is so good in it.
So good. And um I remember even just like I guess the trailer, seeing the main character, George McKay, who plays Lance Corporal Schofield. His expression, just like while he's running, that kind of like
Yeah,
wide-eyed, like you said, kind of innocent, young, and terrified look that he has the whole time, which I think, when I think of Tom Holland, I do kind of think of that expression a little bit
yeah,
with
oh for sure.
Spider-Man, just kind of full of wonder and like innocent. Um, I don't know, it's just so good, but like I think also the thing that makes you feel like you're in the middle of it is all those really long tracking shots that feel like one shot,
Mhm.
because that makes you really feel like you're there, I think.
Yeah, and I love how the movie starts with Schofield and Blake like basically like taking a nap, and
Yeah,
they're just resting, and Schofield. Ah, man, I wish I knew this for sure. So maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure he's leaning up against a tree.
it sounds
Um,
right.
and then at the end of the movie, it ends with him leaning up against a tree after he completes his mission.
Ah,
And he's like by himself. And I like that
like
symmetry.
bookends, yeah.
Yeah. And even if he's not against a tree, it's just the same kind of concept of like resting, but then like, and if you think about it, this movie's like maybe like set over 24 hours. And so it's like,
Yeah.
which is you have no idea what he's been through before this and what else he still will experience in this, or even if he survives the war. I mean, it's
Yeah,
like,
that's a good
but
point too,
it's
because he only completes his mission, we don't know what
right.
happens to him after.
And there's that moment where Benedict Cumberbatch, who plays Colonel Mackenzie at the end, he says something like he calls off, he saves this battalion of troops, but then he's kind of like, maybe it's tomorrow or the next day, we're still gonna we have to face the Germans again. And he's like, the only way this thing ends is the last man standing. And basically, it almost feels like this pessimistic view of like,
Mhm.
yeah, we saved everyone today, but who knows what's gonna happen tomorrow.
Yeah,
And
that
and
was
I
their
remember like,
reality.
right, and I'm like, but that's okay. That's why if you can tell, I'm very passionate about this movie because
That's
like
good.
I think it like captures so much of what life is honestly like, even though
Hmm.
I've never been in a war like this before, and I hope to God that I never have to, or that the people I love never have to, but like, or really anybody in the world, because it's awful. But like the concept of like, are our efforts to like help each other and to do these things, is it like, does it actually matter in the end? Because who knows what's going to happen tomorrow?
Yeah, we
And
only
I
have
think,
today.
right, but I think though, like, it's like you could look at that from that, and that's kind of how I feel like Colonel Mackenzie's throwing out that perspective. But it's like but then you look at Richard Madden's character at the end when he sees, like, yes, he loses his brother, but like you see how Schofield like literally saved all those people that in
Yeah.
that
So it
moment.
did matter, in other
Right.
words. Yeah.
And he, if nothing else, he had that moment with Blake's brother, and it's a terrible. He delivers a terrible news that his brother's dead, but it's like it still is like a meaningful moment, and to have that like connection, and those guys did get to live one more day, if nothing else. We have no idea what happens, but anyway, I do think it matters, and so I don't know if
Yeah.
that all made sense, but that,
No, it does. I think life is unpredictable, and we know
yeah,
that. And when we watch a movie like this, we realize how precarious it actually is because of all the things the main character goes through and somehow survives. And there's no rhyme or reason, right? Like it's not like he deserved to live more than his buddy did. That's not
mhm,
how it works. So it does show like how fragile it is. And
right,
I think that is moving.
yeah,
Yeah. I think there's so many great scenes in this movie. Like I think one of the ones that stood out to me the most is, I mean, it's kind of jumping around a little bit, but I guess the part where he loses his friend with the
oh,
airplane, that part just is so
it's
shocking.
it is like gut wrenching too.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, it's so like, sorry, I feel like I interrupted you a
No,
second.
you're good. No, you didn't. You're good.
I was just gonna say, like, it's one you like it kind of comes at this moment where there's some levity between the two characters. You
Hmm.
get to know like a little bit about them, and you realize that Blake, Lieutenant, or I can't remember Lieutenant or what his title is, but the character of Blake, he's like a more lighthearted person, and Schofield seems
Hmm.
to take himself more serious, and you get this like great character moments, and you see that Blake is like really, and Schofield really does care about him, and he does bring levity to his life in this
Hmm.
terrible situation. And then he dies tragically, where he's trying to save this German pilot that crashes,
Yeah.
and then Schofield's like the one that's like, hey, maybe we should take him out of his misery, and he's like, no, get him water, and then you turn, and it's like you turn around, you see him get stabbed, and it's just like, oh my gosh, like, it's so, it's
It's
like,
awful.
yeah,
I think everything from like when they're just like playing around and then all of a sudden this airplane kind of comes out of nowhere. It just I feel like there's so many moments like that in this movie that feel so surreal, but probably happened or taken
right,
from people's accounts. And like you said, Blake is compassionate and he realizes, I think, that it's a war, right? And that like even though there's an enemy, who is the enemy? It's like they're being told what to do and they're killing
yeah,
people because they're told to, but they don't have a personal stake. And so, when this happens, he's compassionate and he goes, we should save him. And then he gets killed. And I think that that is why later in the movie Schofield ends up in a situation where an enemy soldier's dying and he takes him out, right? It's probably because of that
oh right,
scene.
yeah, right, exactly. And I mean, I yeah, I can't even imagine like the trauma that creates, of like the
Yeah.
fear that you're constantly in, and like you don't want to kill people. I would assume most people are like, I don't want to kill somebody, but like it's almost like what Colonel Mackenzie says, last man standing. It's like you or me, and like to be forced into those situations is, it's, I mean, thinking about it like from like a logical perspective, it's like so messed up when you like
Yes, I
that, like these
know.
young boys are thrown into these situations. And but the part though, to kind of go back to his death scene though, I don't know if, and I've never seen a person die like the way that he dies, and but I would imagine it feels really realistic the way it all happens,
Mhm.
and I can imagine that could be really like probably triggering for people that have ever witnessed anything similar to that. But
Oh, for sure.
The part though that like just gets me every time is when Blake, like Schofield's like trying to pick him up, and Blake is like in so much pain, like, and like
Yeah.
it's acted so well, like I just can't even imagine like tapping into that, like you know, but when he's like finally like he's just kind of holding him, which I think is like a really sweet moment between these two friends of like he just like held him as he's like dying, and then Blake's like, "Am I dying?" And Schofield just like honestly, he's just like, "Yes, you are." Like
Yeah.
speaks to him clearly and direct, but it's like, and then I like how Blake is like, "Can you tell?" I think it's like my mom or my family, like, tell him I wasn't scared, and like I don't know,
Yeah.
it's like a really, it's like sad, but it's like it's very beautiful as well and touching, and like literally like getting like some tears just thinking about it because it's like it's I don't know, it's just
Yeah.
it like shows the fragility of life and the beauty of life and how powerful French. I don't know. There's so many stuff wrapped into it that I
I
take.
agree. I think, I was watching a video earlier this week, and I think I've talked about my feelings on this a couple times on this podcast, but I watched a creator made a video about how I'm trying to summarize this quickly because sometimes I go on tangents,
All,
but
all
it
good.
was basically about how, it took a part of Lord of the Rings where um, Sam and Frodo have a really tender moment, and how that's been kind of made fun of, or people question the characters' sexuality because of the closeness of the two main male characters. And this creator put it in such a good way. He said it's kind of sad that part of the fantasy is that men could have close friendships, and it almost feels
Yeah,
like it has to be in this epic fantasy setting or in a war or something. There has to be some excuse for men to be that close as friends. Not that there's anything wrong if they were, if they
right.
were lovers, there's nothing wrong with that. But there is something wrong with the fact that in our society, we can't imagine men being so close and so tender. And I think
Yeah,
like what you're talking about in that scene is it's like there's almost like this permission around it because he's dying, but really like that it's okay to have like close male friends. And sometimes it kind of, it's beautiful, like you said, even though it's tragic, it's beautiful because they're being honest about their feelings and their tenderness in that moment.
yeah. I honestly, I'm so glad you brought that up because that's actually something that I've been very passionate about lately. I work in the mental health field, and I work with, I work with men and women, but a lot of times I do work with men. And one of the things I see the most is, especially in middle-aged men who 30s, 40s, like there is so much loneliness and isolation because like you basically what you just described is like there is so much a stigma around like men being close friends like that. And like a lot of times men like they get wrapped up in their careers, their families, their relationships with a significant other that
Yeah.
they don't have time, they don't have the ability to like develop these deeper friendships, or they lose the ones they have from childhood or like the early 20s when they were single or whatnot, and it leaves them very isolated and alone. Like I mean, I've personally been gone through stuff like that in my own life, and it's something that's not always talked about a lot. And I think it's seeing something like this, I think, is important because it's like you said, it's okay to have those types of relationships, to show that type of support. And I was actually, it's funny talking about World War One. I was watching a couple of days before I watched 1917. I watched The Kingsman.
Oh
So
yeah, I love the Kingsman.
it's like the prequel one that's set during World War
Oh
One.
yeah.
I somehow missed it, and so it's the first time I watched it, and there's a scene in there where, because it's set during World War One, where a character
Mhm.
like goes through this like really traumatic thing, and they're in the trenches, and he finds another soldier, and there's like this ditch, and the other one has been wounded. He's been there for a while, and he's like, "Hey, I'm really cold," and this other guy's like crying, like just sobbing because he just had this traumatic experience, and they end up like cuddling, basically, like the guy's like
Yeah,
holding
like
him.
comforting each other.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and it's not sexual. It's not like it's just like one guy's cold, one guy just went through something traumatic and needs to be like held or hugged or support.
Yeah. Aw.
And anyway,
Forgot about that.
yeah, it was kind of, and anyway, so yeah, long tangent, but I
No, I
appreciate it.
love my tangents too.
Yeah. And last thing I want to say about this scene about Blake's death is I think what also is like really heart wrenching about it is after Schofield, he is just like you can see like the loss on his face, but then this like other British battalion or whatever shows up, and it's kind of like he has to just kind of like move on and doesn't really get a chance to like sit in any of the grief of it or like the shock even. Like it's like
Yeah.
he's trying to move the body on his own and these soldiers come and help him, and then there's like this, I don't know, like this is where like the acting and like the directing and the way it's shot I think is
Hmm.
done so brilliantly, because there's this like look of complete and utter like loneliness as he's in the truck with these other soldiers and they're kind of goofing around and making jokes, and he's just like stoic and like, and he, I don't know, like to me that's the vibe I get, is just like
Yeah.
he is so lonely, he just lost the one person that like, you know, like his support, his friend, and then it's like the only thing he has left is like, I got to do this mission. Because, and I love the contrast of like the first half of the movie where he's like, why did you pick me? And he's like, he's kind of complaining a lot and he's upset that
Yeah.
like, didn't want to be here. Like, I wish I wouldn't here. But then it's like this switch where he's like, I need to complete this. Like, I need to do this for my friend. I need to save his brother. Like, it's just, I don't know, like the way it's portrayed, the like loneliness and then the like determination. Cause he's like, the truck gets stuck and he's like frustrated, like, no, we got to get this truck moved. And
Yeah.
anyway, it's brilliant acting and brilliant directing and all the things, because it's like there's so much going on besides just what's happening on screen.
I agree. Yeah. I think another interesting part of the movie too to me is like after all that, um, when he gets like knocked unconscious and then he wakes up and it's nighttime
Mm.
and then he makes his way using like a flare through the ruins of that town. It's very
Oh yeah.
haunting
Oh my gosh.
and
Yeah.
beautiful. Again, like there's so many moments that feel very surreal, but like I don't know how to explain. It's like reality is stranger than fiction, I guess. So it like
Yeah.
looks really real. He ends up
Yeah.
running into that French woman for a little bit,
Yeah.
and then he has to abandon her essentially. Um, but yeah, I liked that whole scene too.
Yeah. And I read that Sam Mendes kind of wanted it to feel like dreamlike, the way, because he's like
Yeah.
unconscious and he wakes up and it's dark, and the way, yeah, the way it's lit is like the
Mhm.
only light that's happening is from like the flares and like the machine guns and the, you know, like the explosions going off, like it's, and that's where like the brilliance of someone like oh, why is his name, why am I blanking the cinematographer's name?
Deacons, I think Roger
Yeah,
Deacons.
Roger Deakins.
Yeah,
Like, and I know that like even like Skyfall has scenes like that, the way it's
I
lit.
agree. Yeah,
Yeah, which he did, I'm pretty sure he did with Sam Mendes, but
yeah, I think so.
the yeah, that sequence, like you said, it's very like haunting as well, and like, I mean, you, like you said it so well, sometimes reality is stranger than fiction. Like, I know like sometimes when I've been through something traumatic or something really just kind of just knocks you on your feet, it knocks
Yeah,
you to your knees and you're not sure how to like process or get, and as you're starting to stand back up, it's like, what is going on, like what is
yeah.
my life for reality right now? And that, I feel like, is what's happening to Schofield as he's like, and then, but then he starts getting shot at and he has to like, yeah, it's just, it's done so well.
Yeah, so much happens in the movie. Like sometimes after I watch a movie, I'll just like read the plot of the whole film, and I'm like, man, I was like reading through it while I was kind of boning up for this discussion, and like so much happens to this one character. He has so
Yeah,
many iconic and like um, just vivid scenes that happen to him,
yeah.
just from like beginning to end.
Well, and the scene with the French woman he meets,
Mhm.
I think too, is like, I like in this movie. I just need to say it's paced so well, because
Yeah,
we go from like this kind of intense scene where he's running through this like battle, and then he has this like, the movie kind of slows down for, and this is probably not, maybe like a 5 minute scene where he has this like moment with her, and I love though that it's like he he's like so eager to help, and you find out later at the end of the movie that he has what we assume is a wife and daughter back
yeah,
home, And so
Yeah, and he
I
never even mentioned it. Even when
right,
she's, like, talking to him and when other people bring up their kids and things like that, he doesn't even mention it, you
yeah.
notice?
Yeah,
Very
and he
private.
even asks, like, "Do you have children?" He doesn't answer her, like, and but I love
Maybe
the,
he
like,
just
he's
didn't wanna think
so
about it because it's so painful.
oh, right, and yeah, there's that line too earlier where he's like, "I hate going back home because I know I couldn't stay," or, like, I have to come back," or something like that, and,
Yeah.
but I love that, like, he has, like, food and he's so eager to, like, help her, and then she's like, "Well, baby needs milk," and then there's that callback to when he puts the cow's milk in his canteen, and, like, and I love that, like, it's such, like, a simple act of, like, kindness, and, like, the way
Yeah.
and and I guess that's too, like, sometimes life we have the like, we can be going through something incredibly difficult, and then we have this opportunity where, like, things just align, like, these small coincidences happen where we can help another person or maybe someone's helping us because she also helps, like, clean up the blood and the band, like, the back of his head, like, the way they help each other, I think is just really beautiful, and then they leave and probably never see each other again, but it's like, they essentially, like, almost saved each other's lives in that short
Yeah.
which I think is just so cool, like, in this amidst this whole backdrop of this, like, terrible, tragic war, like, they have this moment of, like, 2 people that don't know each other, like, helping one another.
Yeah. I wonder if, like, the reason why you don't hear about his family is because, he's 17, and maybe in the audience's mind, you wanna keep thinking of him that way. Like,
Yeah,
and then at the end of the movie, you find out he's a parent. It's like, well, I mean, Sam Mendes bases off of his grandfather, right? So he was thinking of him maybe that way as like, man, my grandfather was basically just a kid in
right.
the war and yet had like a whole family back home. It's so different from today, like
Mhm.
that's not the norm to have
No,
children when you're 17. So,
right, yeah, I mean, I didn't have my first kid until I think I was almost 30, I think.
I feel
Yeah,
like that's more typical today,
yeah,
because people can plan and, back
right.
then, like, people grew up quick, but
Oh,
maybe
no,
it's to, like, kinda conserve that innocence, but then at the end go, he has a family too, everybody had a family."
yeah.
Mm.
No, for sure. Um, one thing to jump back towards the beginning
Mhm,
that I think is a really brilliant scene and really also very haunting as well. And this is like kind of like the horror movie vibes is when they're going through the no man's land, Blake and Schofield, and you get like you see like the dead horses that are like rotting, and you see the
yeah,
bodies, and it's like that part is that is intense. And I but it's also like it's like a I don't know 5 or 10 minute scene. I can't remember the length of it, but it's a good stretch where you just see them like there's not a lot of dialogue, and it's not like action packed or anything. It's just them like crawling through this stuff and like and then there's like the moment where the bob wire gets stuck in his hand and
mhm,
it's like he's like getting shot at is scary and intense, but like that you can like feel that pain. You're like, oh man, like
yeah,
that would hurt so bad. And then he just has to like kind of keep going. And also and I you mentioned that Sam Mendes' grandfather who was, based on like how he would wear gloves or wash his hands, right? Is that what you were
mhm. Yeah, yeah, so that he, like, felt like he had to wash his hands for a long time after
yeah.
having to
Well,
live,
and
like, in those conditions.
and as you said that, I was like, I noticed this last time watching it is that Schofield, like from the beginning, so he gets this like wound from the barbed wire, and there's like blood, and then there's like that explosion where he's covered in like the dust, and then there's he when Blake is dying, he has Blake's blood all over his hand. He then when they're pushing the truck, he falls in the mud, like his hands are
Ugh,
covered in mud, and then just other things throughout, and it's like he doesn't even have time to like wash the blood off his hands from his friend
yeah,
dying, or the mud off his hands after falling in a truck, like. And I wonder if that's kind of the inspiration of like your hands get so dirty. I don't know, like maybe that's his way of like showing honoring his grandfather's like maybe some people could see as a weird quirk of like why do you always have to wash your hands? But like,
yeah.
oh, I get why you need to wash your hands because like your hands were always dirty or you're always like you didn't even have time to and wash your hands. I mean, who knows? That's just my
No, I
interpretation.
agree. I think, living in the level of filth in the trench, I'm sure is traumatizing on its own. And then on top of that, put the horrors of war and that sort of metaphorical, like blood on your hands and literal blood on their hands. Like, I think that's all connected. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah, and so that another thing too, like a little tidbit I thought was really interesting was when they first go to, or they're trying to go cross into no man's land, and there's that character played by Andrew Scott. He, like, when they first show up, he asks him, like, "What day is it? We have a bet." And they're like, "It's Friday." And he's like, "Oh, this guy, I thought it was Tuesday." I thought that dialogue was interesting because it just
Yeah.
shows like how disconnected you are from almost like just reality, because you don't even know the day. You're just like waiting to die or to kill somebody. Like that's your life. Like that is, it was just such an interesting interaction that I thought that, like, that to kind of demonstrate the just how insane and different that type of life would be, like to live in the trenches like that.
Yeah, I mean, basically, like they're just waiting for orders.
Right.
They don't they're not like connected to the rest of the war. They don't have the same information we would have now because it's 1917. So they're just kind of having to rely on whatever they're given, and it sounds like didn't even bother telling them what day it was.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, so it's because, and also too, I think it shows like when you are going through really intense life circumstances, like I've had days like that too, where I'm like, I don't even know the day anymore right now, because I'm like just trying to keep my head on straight, and like just get through I'm trying to get through whatever day it is. I don't know what day
Yeah.
it is. You're going through a lot of stuff. And so, yeah, anyway, that's just, I thought that was really interesting, like this small little detail.
Yeah, but because you don't think about it, right? You don't think about what it must have been like
Mhm.
to be there and to be
Yeah.
stuck there, and yeah, it's just it's fascinating, but also really sad.
Yeah.
um we kind of touched on it a little bit, but I think another part that really kind of, I don't want to say messed with me, but like another part that I found emotional was, like I was kind of saying earlier, that part where he's like in the trench and in the mud with that other, I guess, like bad guy, with the enemy, and he like wakes up and then he has to like suffocate him.
Oh yeah.
That part I think is because I feel like throughout the movie you're seeing them kill somebody, but typically it's like a sniper situation, or there's
Yeah.
some degree of like separation, but that scene is so like it truly embodies like it's me or you,
Right. Is that
and
the one
it's
where,
horrifying.
yeah, is that the one where he is like, he goes into that like building and he like covers the guy's mouth first?
Yeah, maybe that's what I'm thinking. I thought it was in the trench, unless a part of me is like, am I thinking of a different movie? I might
Yeah,
be.
maybe. Because I know, I'm trying to remember if there's a part where he goes in this, is right after he leaves the French woman, and but yeah, there's this soldier and he's like covering, and he's like, don't, please don't scream. I don't want to kill you, but I don't want to die either. And then the guy starts screaming because there's the other soldier. So then he like chokes him out basically. And yeah, it is. It's like that's the part where you're like,
I think I'm thinking of All Quiet on the Western Front.
oh, okay.
Because I think it's that movie where there's like a scene, like literally in the trenches, and he's in the trenches, and it's like red and muddy, and like
Is that the new one or the old one?
I think it's the new one. And
I
all of a
still
sudden
haven't seen
that
that one
person
yet.
like wakes up and he's like, oh no, and then he has to like kill him, like just suffocate
Yeah.
him in the trench. That must be that other movie then.
Okay.
It just
I
kind of
haven't
was
seen the
starting to.
new one yet. I've heard good things
Oh,
about it.
yeah, it's kinda getting my wires crossed, but I
Yeah.
think I think I might be thinking of that
It's
movie. It
understandable. So
similar vibe-wise, I guess.
yeah. Well, when I brought up the Kingsman reference, for a second I thought that was this movie, because I literally watched him like
Yeah, well, it's
days
like
ago.
sometimes, I mean, especially when it's in the same time period, sometimes you're like,
Right.
"Wait, did that happen in this one?" But you're right about that other scene you're talking about where he begs that guy to be quiet. It's so
Yeah.
rough.
And then it's like, because I don't think he even has any weapons. So he doesn't have like a gun. Because then there's the other German soldier there, and he just like runs and like, like pushes him out of the way. And then it's like he's sprinting for his life through this like town to find the river, which I think is that's another like action sequence that's shot brilliantly because you're just following him running, which is like,
Mhm.
God, it's such a simple thing, like a guy running away, like that, like maybe shouldn't be that entertaining, but it's like the way it's shot is that's where I think this movie elevates certain things because it's like
Yeah.
you're in that, and then when he jumps off the cliff and you track him all the way down, falling in the river, it's like it's just done so well. Where you're like, it's almost like you can take a breath, like a sigh of relief when he's in the water because you're like, okay, he made it out, like at least for now, like he's okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway,
Totally agree.
I'm just thinking about that and like I can feel my like heart pumping a little bit because I'm just like, yeah, that's like so intense.
It was intense.
Yeah.
Like the whole movie is.
I know it's yeah, it's man, it's and then but then you it's see that's the thing, you go from that and you're like, okay, like he's in the then he gets out of the river and he's to climb over those bodies, like that is a horrifying moment too.
Oh yeah. I
And
mean
then
that's awful.
I think it's like depicted just so well afterwards. He gets to the bank of the river and he just is like sobbing, like he just
Mhm.
like can't hold it anymore. And I think like I think that's like it's like hard to watch, but I appreciate that they give him that moment of like grief and like they like where it's like I can't even hold this in anymore. Like I
Mhm.
cannot believe I had to do that to survive. Like and and then everything, I mean, just everything else that's happened up to that point. And then he like hears the singing, which is also like it's very beautiful but kind of haunting the way it's like this a cappella like guy just singing,
Yeah.
and you see him like lay up against a tree and it like the shot like pans around, you see all the soldiers, then it goes back to him and he just is like it's like pure exhaustion, like, and I think also like failure almost, like I survived but like I didn't, like I am so tired, I don't know if I can keep going. That's like at least that's how I'm reading into it, like how I like his facial expressions are just like I'm like I'm done, like I
Yeah.
have nothing else I can give, like my body is literally like emotionally, physically, I am just like spent. And I think that the way it's shot and once again acted is just so well done.
So well done. By the way, I did confirm the scene I'm thinking of is from All Quiet on the Western Front, which came out in 2022.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if it's still on Netflix, but I do recommend it.
Yeah.
Um, it is good.
I remember like I had it queued up to watch one night and then it was like, I don't know if I'm in like I had because I heard it's pretty intense. I was like, I don't know if like I'm like in the mood for something like super heavy. So but I
Well, where
watched.
this one leaves you hopeful, that one may not. So, but there are some iconic scenes in that one too that I think look similar to this film, which is why it
Yeah.
started to kind of cross over in my mind. But yeah, definitely steel yourself and think like I may walk away from this feeling depressed. Like
Yeah.
it's a bummer
This
for
is
sure.
okay. Yeah, I think that's kind of how what I'd heard. And so I was like,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe I'll wait for a different day. And then I just haven't got back. So, but I need to. Um. Anyway, yeah, that sequence though I think is just very well done, and um, which then I think leads into. And I don't know if you want to get to this part yet, but like
Sure.
to me, I think the pinnacle of the movie, of when so like he finds out that like this is the battalion he was trying to reach, and
Yeah.
he's just like so anxious and determined to like get to Colonel McKenzie to deliver his message, and it's um, I don't know, like I heard it, this is like they coined the phrase like Schofield's run, this scene when he's running across.
Oh yeah, that's such a good scene.
Yeah, like it's and I know it was in the trailers and stuff, and so I remember seeing that, but then seeing it on like seeing when it happened and the context of what was going on,
Yeah.
I think it's to me like one of the most exhilarating film scenes I've ever seen in a film. Like it's just like I don't know, like the way that it's like he is just so determined and anxious to get to his destination, but
Yeah.
he's like running into soldiers, and which was not that was improvised. I read too, like that
Oh
they weren't.
really?
Yeah, and it happens twice, and they just kind of get back up, and it took him 2 days to film the scene as well, and it was a 300-meter run, which that's like almost a full lap around a track, and that's not easy to sprint like that. I used to do 300-meter hurdles in high school, and like I'd be dead after those races. So like seeing him like trying to run and like after all the other stuff he's been through. I don't know. It's just like that part of the movie is like, I think it brings everything together in such like a perfect like climax of like, where that's like where I'll kind of get a lot of the inspiration of like, when you're going through something really hard, of like sometimes like you have to push just a little bit further to get what you need, or what you like, the outcome you're looking for, or some days it's literally just surviving the day, but like that's what it sometimes might feel like, is like this sprint through all these obstacles and like people in your way, and you gotta like, sometimes you're gonna fall down. And anyway, it's just yeah, chef's kiss. I could talk about that all day.
Oh, it's awesome. I mean, I think also the amount of coordination it must have taken to achieve that shot.
Right,
And
yeah,
it's just it's so impressive, and it doesn't feel like you're watching people in the studio react to green screen. Like, it felt real.
yeah.
And
Yeah, I know they had
I love
like
that.
500 extras in this on,
Yeah.
filming a lot of this. So a lot of the people I think are real, and yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's I think it's always a challenge to do a period piece anyway, but the coordination of that scene alone is, I mean, you can see why it's in the trailer. It's it's
Yeah,
the best part.
right. And I like a lot of times in movies when we see like those money shots in the trailers,
Mhm.
it can be almost like, oh, I saw this and it's not as cool as, or it's, I just remember like the first Avengers movie when it came out, it showed Tony Stark falling and then Hulk catching him, which
Yeah.
like is like a big moment in the movie. And I remember being like, oh, why did they show that in the trailers? Because like that's like when he saved, like he destroys the aliens, and like, but this still had the impact, I think, because there was so much context behind it that I think makes it
Yeah.
more
The
impactful.
build up, yeah,
Yeah,
is what
exactly.
it's a payoff instead of just a scene.
Right.
Yeah, it's like they always pick probably some of the best scenes for the trailer, but you're right, sometimes they reveal too much and it's kind of a
Mhm.
bummer. But I agree with you. I saw that, like, I always think of like the music and the way that like the numbers, like as he's like running, like appear on the screen
Yeah.
or zoom in. Like, it looked so cool in the trailer, but
Right.
even in the movie itself, it's like, if anything, it's better.
Yeah. And a movie like this, I understand why they put it in, because it's not necessarily like, it's not the Avengers or something. So like, you have to sell it, and I think the way they did it, yeah, with the title and the numbers and stuff was really well done. So
Yeah.
it was, yeah, definitely like I totally get why it was in the trailer.
Are there any other scenes that we haven't kind of like touched on yet that you wanted to?
Um, I'm just looking over my notes. I think we got through a lot of them. I guess. Oh, just the last. I I mentioned like how there's like the beginning of the movie. Schofield's like he does not want to go on this like mission, and
Mhm.
he's just like, let's think about this. Let's take our time. And Blake's just like, no, we got to go. We got to go now. Like, it's my brother. I got to save him. And then kind of just like how then that once Blake dies, like the urgency, like Schofield now has that same urgency. And
Yeah.
I really like that, because it's like him honoring his friend. And
Yeah.
and then after, once he's like delivered the message, it's almost like anticlimactic a bit. Um,
Yeah. Like
and
real life, right?
yeah,
Like, there's not always a huge payoff.
and like Benedict Cumberbatch is just, he's kind of like a dick to him. He's just, but it's like, I mean, yeah, it's real life sometimes. And I like, though, like he comes out of that like tent, and there's the other, I don't know, military leader. I don't know what his title was, but he kind of like thanks him, and like, you realize, like, you saved all these people, and so he does get that recognition. But then after that, it's like all he cares about is finding Blake's brother, and he wants to
Yeah.
find. And that's like a really touching moment too, where he like gives him his rings, and he gives him um, I can't remember what else it is,
I think
but
dog tags.
yeah, his dog tags. And Richard Madden, I think, plays it really well, where he's just like he's like excited, like, oh, that's my brother's battalion, my brother, and then he has to deliver the news, and he's just like frozen there, like holding it, and he's trying
Yeah.
not to cry, like he's trying to like not show that emotion, but like he's like obviously like it's still coming out. I like it's just a really, I don't know, it's like a really beautiful scene. I like the Schofield, like it was almost like that was like just as equally as important to him, was reaching Blake's brother and like
Mhm.
and honoring his friend. And I thought that was just like it's just like a yeah, really beautiful moment as well.
Yeah, I mean, and the range of emotion I think that the characters portray when they kind of can't always show all of it on their face. Like I think that's
Yeah.
hard to do, because
Right.
it gets you right, and like you feel it, and yet it's not like they're bursting into tears, like you said. Like they're still able to portray that, while being restrained. It's pretty impressive.
Yeah, which I think is really, I mean, like that's a real experience. I think that a lot of us have as humans. Like we're in situations where like our body wants to cry or let it out, but like maybe we don't feel like it's socially acceptable or whatever the reason is. So
Yeah,
we're trying to consume it and not let it out. And I think as an actor, that would be hard to portray well, but like
yeah,
they do it so well. Like it's and anyway, it's yeah, it's a great scene and like a really touching way, I think, to kind of like end the movie.
yeah, yeah. It's a great film. I guess then, if we're kind of at the end of our discussion, then I will ask you a couple quick questions.
Yeah.
And they are, what about this movie draws you back to it that makes you want to revisit it? Or you talked about, having a difficult day and wanting to return back to it. What about the movie does that for you?
Yeah, that is I love that question. And I think like yeah, like kind of like I said, is just this movie is really it's just really inspiring to me. And I know like sometimes we think about inspirational movies, it's like I don't know, like Remember the Titans or something, like which I think is, inspirational movie. But like this is movie like you wouldn't to me I wouldn't like a World War I thriller like maybe isn't what I'd think of, but like the way that you see this character just go through these like intense experiences and still have to like push forward and to not like just to not give up. Honestly, that's I think what I find the most inspiring is it the movie to me it feels like a metaphor for life at times where it's like we have to like sometimes life can be so hard and it can be so brutal and just like weigh you down to where you want to give up. And even if you're not, like I said, fighting a physical war, it could be whatever. And like, and to have to like just keep going can be so hard sometimes. And to me, like seeing this character go through all these things is inspiring to me to like when I'm going through something to be able to like keep pushing forward.
Yeah.
And also like sometimes like Schofield, he's on his own throughout the movie. I mean, he has Blake with him in the beginning, but he's really on his own. And I think in life, that's kind of really, we really are on our own as individuals, but we're not alone at the same time because throughout the movie, whenever he like actually really needs help or something, there's always someone there to like get him to that next spot. And I think that's really important for me too to remember is like when I feel like I'm on my own or I'm isolated and I don't have anybody, is that like if I keep pushing forward, I will be able to find the support I need from somebody. And it could be like someone like a family or a friend, but it could be someone totally a stranger at times. And I think that's like what is so cool about this movie is the way it depicts his journey, like going through these things and how at the moments when he needs help, like he gets that help to even if it's something small, like Mark Strong's character, like giving him the ride to his next destination. Like that's something maybe trivial or small, but it's helps and it gets him a moment to like to get to that next spot. So that's I don't know if any of that made sense, but
I think
that's
it does. I feel like maybe you're talking about like it's a horrible situation. He's in a tragic situation, and yet the humanity of some of the characters around him stepping in
yeah,
and helping him kind of gives you hope. Like even when things
right,
are really bad, there's even in the worst possible situation, World War, there's good people and there's good real moments of like real friendship and real support in the
right. And
film.
if you're honest and genuine with what you are trying to do and how you're trying to get through something, help will come. That's kind of like what I like to believe in my philosophy,
Yeah.
and maybe not in the way we want or the way we think or what we think we need, but when we can step back, like because I can look through different I was talking to you offline. Like I've been going through a lot of really intense and difficult personal things lately, and there's times where I like in the moment don't necessarily see the help, but I can look back and be like, oh wow, like this person or this thing really that actually was meaningful and helped me kind of get through that day. And that's kind of how I see some of the stuff happening to Schofield in this movie, and that's kind of where I find a lot of the inspiration of just like trying to hold on to that humanity when things feel overwhelming or they feel dark or insurmountable.
Yeah. And how would you describe this film to someone that maybe hasn't seen it before, is thinking about watching it?
Kind of like maybe just how I just did. It's like that. It's a movie it's intense. It's there's a lot of tragic and dark things that happen, but it's also very inspiring and hopeful in the way that the characters like get through these like impossible odds. And I think we all need to be reminded sometimes of like sometimes life feels insurmountable and but we can still get through it. And that's what this movie's about. It's not just like a war movie. It's not just a movie about World War I, but about like the human experience of how to like push forward through something really difficult. So yeah.
Agreed. Yeah. I think it's a great film, and we kind of talked about it at the beginning, but there's a lot of World War One and Two and other wars out there movies. But I think this is one of the great ones. I really, really enjoyed it and really enjoyed talking about it with you, Thomas. Like, is there anything you want to plug or before you head out?
Um yeah, so I have a podcast that I do called Cinematic Stories, and I haven't been doing it as much. But basically what I do is I interview people and ask different questions about different movies and like the memories associated with them. I love talking about movies and I love talking about people's life stories, and so that's kind of like a marriage of those two things. And so yeah, that's I haven't had anybody on for a while, but I've been doing like my own personal movie stories, I guess, as I'm literally like processing through and going through some difficult things. And so it's been pretty more personal lately. So if anybody's curious about that, they're welcome to check it out. Yeah, it's called the Cinematic Stories Podcast, and it's based anywhere you listen to podcasts, Spotify, Apple. Um, so yeah, that's my
Great.
podcast. So
Well, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for coming on. Hope to have you back soon.
thank you.